The stars looked different that morning when Captain Jake Morrison stepped onto the bridge of the UHS Defiance. Something was wrong with the readings on his screens, and the normally calm space around the Kepler 442 system showed strange energy, patterns that made his instruments flicker and dance with unusual data. His crew of 45 men and women had been exploring this region for 3 months, without finding anything more exciting than a few dead rocks and some ice comets. But today felt different in a way that made his stomach tighten with worry. Lieutenant Ben Parker was the first to notice the readings change from strange to impossible. The young man had been monitoring deep space sensors for 2 years and had never seen anything like the massive energy surge that appeared on his screen at exactly 0847 hours ship time. The energy signature was bigger than anything they had recorded before, and it was moving toward them at a speed that defied everything they knew about physics and space travel. Dr. Lisa Carter rushed to the bridge when the alert klaxons began to sound throughout the ship. She was a xenobiologist who had spent her entire career hoping to find alien life, but the readings she saw on the screens made her hands shake with excitement and fear. The energy patterns were clearly artificial and showed signs of intelligence behind their creation, but the scale was beyond anything humans had ever built or imagined possible. The first ships appeared like ghosts made of crystal and light. They emerged from what looked like tears in space itself, and each vessel was the size of a small moon with surfaces that seemed to pulse with inner fire. The Defiance and its crew of explorers suddenly felt very small and fragile as 5 of these enormous ships took position around their tiny human vessel. Every piece of technology on the Defiance began to malfunction as waves of unknown energy washed over them. Jake tried to send a message to Earth Central Command, but found that his communication systems were completely dead. The engineering crew reported that their engines had stopped working, and even the basic life support systems were beginning to fail. Whatever technology these alien ships used was more advanced than anything humans had developed in their 3 centuries of space exploration. The voice that spoke to them came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It filled the bridge and seemed to speak directly into their minds without using any kind of communication device they could detect. The being that spoke called himself Zephyr, the Eternal, and his words carried a weight that made everyone on the bridge feel small and insignificant. Zephyr explained that he and his people were the Viridians and that they had created all life in the galaxy millions of years ago. He said they were the ancient gods who had seeded countless worlds with the spark of life and had now returned to reclaim their rightful place as rulers of all living things. His voice was beautiful and terrible at the same time and seemed to carry the wisdom of ages beyond human understanding. The Viridians appeared on the bridge of the Defiance without warning or invitation. They stood nearly 3 meters tall with translucent skin that glowed with soft light from within their bodies. Their faces were elegant and perfect in a way that made them seem both beautiful and alien. Zephyr stepped forward, and his presence filled the bridge with a sense of power that made the human crew feel like children in the presence of adults. Jake found himself struggling to maintain his composure as Zephyr explained that humans were among the youngest of the Viridian creations, and that they had been allowed to develop and grow until now. The time had come for all of the children races to acknowledge their creators and accept their proper place in the cosmic order. The Viridians had returned to guide and protect their creations as loving parents. Guide their children. Dr. Carter watched in amazement as Zephyr demonstrated his power by repairing the damaged systems on the Defiance with nothing more than a gesture of his hand. The lights came back on and the engines hummed to life as if they had never been broken. When Lieutenant Parker asked how this was possible, Zephyr smiled and said that the laws of physics were merely suggestions to beings who had transcended the physical limitations of normal existence. The demonstration continued as Zephyr healed a crew member who had been injured during the system failures. The man's broken arm mended itself instantly, and his pain disappeared as if it had never existed. The Viridians explained that death and suffering were unnecessary for those who accepted their divine guidance, and that eternal life and happiness waited for those who proved themselves worthy of such gifts. News of the Viridian arrival spread throughout human space, as similar encounters occurred at every human colony and outpost. The massive crystalline ships appeared at Earth and Mars and all the other worlds where humans had built their homes. The message was always the same, and the demonstrations of power were always overwhelming. The beings who claimed to be gods had returned, and they expected their children to welcome them with open arms. Admiral Henry Davis received reports from across human space that told the same story everywhere. The Viridians were peaceful, but firm in their demands for recognition and worship. They promised prosperity and protection to those who accepted their rule and hinted at terrible consequences for those who might choose to resist. The technology they displayed was so far beyond human capabilities that resistance seemed impossible anyway. Within days of first contact, most human colonies had begun to surrender to Viridian authority. The aliens established temples on each world and required daily worship from all human inhabitants. They promised that faithful service would be rewarded with advancement to higher forms of existence, and that the most worthy humans might eventually join the ranks of the divine themselves. Jake Morrison and his crew were among the first humans to see the Viridians, but they would not be the last to question what they had witnessed. Something about the perfect beings and their impossible technology felt wrong in ways that none of them could explain. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they would grow in the darkness of submission until they became something the false gods had never expected to face from their human children. 3 months had passed since the Viridians arrived and changed everything about human life across the galaxy. The massive crystalline ships now hung in orbit above every human world like silent guardians or watchful predators, depending on how one chose to see them. Most humans had chosen to see them as protectors and had willingly submitted to what they believed was divine rule from beings who had created all life in the universe. Dr. Lisa Carter stood in the hidden laboratory beneath New Haven Colony and stared at the data she had been collecting in secret. The underground facility had been built by colonists who refused to accept Viridian rule without question, and Carter had been working with them to study their new alien overlords. What she had discovered in her research was beginning to make her question everything the Viridians had told humanity about themselves and their divine nature. The healing abilities that had so impressed everyone during first contact followed very specific patterns that Carter had been tracking for weeks. The Viridians could repair broken bones and heal cuts with remarkable speed, but they seemed to struggle with genetic disorders and diseases that affected the cellular level. Their power worked perfectly on external injuries but became less effective when dealing with problems that required more complex biological understanding. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker had been leading a small resistance group that monitored Viridian activities from the shadows. His team had discovered that the aliens retreated to their ships for several hours each day during what they called their meditation period. During these times, the Viridians became completely unreachable and would not respond to any attempts at communication from their human followers. Parker suspected that this daily withdrawal was not meditation but something more practical and necessary. The resistance fighters had also noticed that younger-looking Viridians seemed to possess less power than their elders. The beings who appeared to be in their prime could manipulate matter and energy with ease, while those who looked younger struggled with even simple demonstrations of their abilities. This suggested that their power was not innate, but learned through experience and practice like any other skill. On Earth, Dr. Maria Rodriguez worked with a secret government task force that had been established to study the Viridians from a distance. The team had been intercepting alien communications using quantum detection equipment, and Rodriguez had made a breakthrough that changed everything they thought they knew about their new rulers. The telepathic broadcasts that the Viridians used to speak to humans across vast distances were not telepathic at all, but relied on complex quantum entanglement networks. Rodriguez had discovered that the Viridians were using technology to create the illusion of supernatural abilities. Their matter manipulation required specific quantum field generators, and their healing powers worked through advanced nanotechnology that repaired damaged tissue at the molecular level. Most importantly, she had found evidence that the Viridians were not gods but simply an alien species with very advanced technology that they used to deceive less developed civilizations. The resistance movement began to grow as more humans started to question what they were seeing. The group called themselves the Truth Seekers, and they used quantum encrypted communications that the Viridians could not intercept to share information across human space. Their goal was to expose the reality behind the alien deception and free humanity from what they believed was a form of technological slavery disguised as divine rule. Carter had been studying video recordings of Viridian demonstrations and noticed that their seemingly impossible feats always involved specific hand gestures and body movements. The aliens never simply willed things to happen but always performed what looked like ritualistic actions before their technology activated. She theorized that these movements were actually commands for hidden devices that the Viridians carried with them at all times. Parker's surveillance team had managed to track the energy signatures that accompanied Viridian power displays and found that they always originated from small devices that the aliens wore beneath their glowing skin. The readings suggested that these were highly sophisticated tools that could manipulate quantum fields to create the effects that humans interpreted as divine miracles. The Viridians were not gods, but extremely advanced beings who used technology to maintain their deception. The underground resistance had also discovered that the aliens showed signs of fatigue after extended use of their abilities. The Viridians would often retreat to private chambers after performing major demonstrations and would emerge hours later looking drained and exhausted. This behavior was inconsistent with beings who possessed unlimited divine power, but made perfect sense for aliens who were using energy-intensive technology to maintain their facade. Rodriguez had been analyzing the quantum patterns in Viridian communications and found references to historical records that mentioned previous conquests. The encrypted data suggested that the Viridians had used the same deception on other species throughout the galaxy and that humanity was simply their latest target. The aliens had perfected their technique over thousands of years and had successfully enslaved dozens of civilizations using the same claims of divine authority. The Truth Seekers realized that they were facing an enemy that had experience in conquest and deception that spanned millennia. The Viridians had refined their methods through practice on countless worlds and had learned exactly how to exploit the natural tendency of less advanced species to worship what they did not understand. However, the Resistance also understood that knowledge of the deception was the first step toward freedom. Carter and her team had begun working on ways to counter Viridian technology using human science and engineering. They believed that if they could understand how the alien devices worked, they might be able to develop countermeasures that would expose the truth to all of humanity. The false gods would lose their power once people realized that they were seeing advanced technology rather than divine miracles. The Resistance knew that they faced a difficult battle against beings who had conquered entire civilizations, but they also knew that humans had never been good at accepting defeat. The Truth Seekers were determined to expose the Viridian deception and free their species from the technological slavery that masqueraded as divine blessing. The seeds of rebellion were growing in the darkness, and soon they would bloom into open defiance. The breakthrough came when the Truth Seekers managed to capture a damaged Viridian device during a daring raid on a temple complex in the outer colonies. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker had led the mission personally, and his team barely escaped with their lives, but the prize they brought back changed everything the Resistance thought they knew about their alien rulers. The device was no bigger than a human hand, but contained technology that was centuries beyond anything Earth scientists had ever imagined. Dr. Lisa Cauda spent 3 weeks studying the captured device in her hidden laboratory beneath New Haven Colony. The object appeared to be made of a crystalline material that shifted and changed color depending on how light hit its surface. Inside the crystal, she found microscopic circuits that seemed to operate on principles that human science was only beginning to understand. The device was clearly artificial and required specific bioneural patterns to activate, which explained why only Viridians could operate their miraculous Technology. The quantum field manipulator was what Carter decided to call the device after. She understood its basic function. The technology worked by creating localized distortions in spacetime that allowed the user to move and reshape matter at the molecular level. The healing abilities that had so impressed humans were simply the result of using these quantum fields to repair damaged tissue and restore healthy cellular structures. The device was incredibly sophisticated, but it was still just a tool created by intelligent beings rather than evidence of divine power. Captain Jake Morrison had been working with the Resistance ever since his first encounter with the Viridians, and he volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission the Truth Seekers had ever attempted. Using stolen access codes that Parker's team had obtained from converted human collaborators, Morrison and 12 volunteers prepared to infiltrate one of the massive Viridian ships orbiting above New Haven. The mission was almost certainly suicide, but it was their only chance to learn the truth about their alien overlords. The infiltration team used a modified shuttle that had been equipped with stealth technology reverse-engineered from captured Viridian devices. Morrison and his crew approached the crystalline ship during the daily meditation period, when the aliens retreated to their private chambers and could not monitor their surroundings. The shuttle docked with the alien vessel without triggering any alarms, and the team began their dangerous journey into the heart of enemy territory. What they found inside the Viridian ship challenged everything humans believed about their supposed gods. The corridors were filled with advanced technology that clearly showed signs of wear and maintenance requirements. The walls contained access panels and control systems that looked alien but were obviously the products of engineering rather than divine creation. Most shocking of all were the vast chambers filled with what appeared to be young Viridians who looked nothing like the glowing beings that ruled over human colonies. These juvenile aliens were shorter and less luminescent than their elders and showed clear signs of cybernetic enhancement. Mechanical implants were visible beneath their translucent skin, and they moved with the awkward gait of beings who were still learning to control their augmented bodies. Morrison realized that the Viridians were not born with their abilities, but acquired them through technological enhancement as they matured. The divine beings that humanity worshipped were simply very old aliens who had lived long enough to fully integrate with their artificial enhancements. The most important discovery came when Morrison's team found their way to the ship's central databank. The storage system contained historical records that went back thousands of years and told the true story of the Viridian species. Dr. Maria Rodriguez had been right in her suspicions about previous conquests because the files showed that the aliens had been using the same deception for millennia. They were not gods, but an ancient species that had achieved technological transcendence. Roughly 50,000 years ago, the records revealed that the Viridians had started as a normal biological species on a world that had been destroyed by their own sun going supernova. The survivors had fled into space and spent thousands of years developing the technology they needed to enhance their bodies and extend their lifespans. Their quantum manipulation devices and nanotechnology healing systems were the result of scientific advancement rather than divine blessing. They had become so advanced that they appeared godlike to younger civilizations, but they were still mortal beings who could be defeated. Morrison's team discovered that the Viridians had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy using identical methods. They would appear to a developing civilization claiming to be the creators of all life and demanding worship in exchange for technological gifts. The conquered species would serve them faithfully until they either destroyed themselves through stagnation or proved troublesome enough to be eliminated. Humanity was simply the latest target in a campaign of deception that had lasted for thousands of years. The historical files also revealed the fate of species that had resisted Viridian rule. Entire worlds had been sterilized when their populations refused to accept alien authority, and whole civilizations had been wiped out to serve as examples to others. The Viridians were not benevolent gods, but ruthless conquerors who used their technological advantages to enslave less advanced species. They had perfected their methods through practice on countless worlds and had never encountered serious resistance. From their victims, the infiltration team barely escaped the alien ship with their stolen data, but they had obtained the proof they needed to expose the Viridian deception. Morrison and his surviving crew members brought back evidence that would change everything if they could find a way to share it with the rest of humanity. The false gods were not divine beings, but ancient aliens who had used their technology to deceive and enslave entire civilizations for thousands of years. The truth seekers now had the knowledge they needed to fight back against their oppressors, but they still faced the challenge of convincing millions of humans who had accepted Viridian rule without question. The resistance would need to find a way to expose the truth on a scale that could not be ignored or suppressed by their alien overlords. The time for hiding in the shadows was almost over, and the real battle for human freedom was about to begin. The truth seekers faced their greatest challenge when they realized that exposing the Viridian deception would be almost impossible. Millions of humans across the galaxy had accepted their alien rulers as gods and would not easily believe that they had been deceived by advanced technology. Dr. Lisa Carter knew that they needed more than just evidence to convince people who had built their entire lives around worshiping beings they believed had created all life in the universe. The resistance needed a plan that would expose the truth in a way that could not be denied or explained away by Viridian propaganda. Carter proposed that they wait for the Festival of Ascension, which was a galaxy-wide celebration that happened once every 3 months, when all humans were required to gather at Viridian temples. During this massive public ceremony, they would have their best chance to reach the largest number of people at the same time. Chief Engineer Amy Foster had been working in secret for months to reverse engineer the captured Viridian technology. Her team had built crude but functional replicas of the quantum field manipulators that the aliens used to create their miraculous effects. The human-made devices were much larger and less efficient than the alien originals, but they could neutralize Viridian powers within a limited range. Foster had also discovered that the alien technology was vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic interference. Dr. Maria Rodriguez had been developing a computer virus that could disrupt the quantum entanglement networks the Viridians used for their telepathic communications. The virus would spread through their systems and cause cascading failures that would leave them unable to coordinate their responses or maintain their illusions of divine power. Rodriguez had tested the virus on captured alien devices and found that it could cause permanent damage to their quantum manipulation systems. The plan required perfect timing and coordination across dozens of human worlds. The Resistance had spent months building secret communication networks and recruiting allies who were willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Many of the recruits were humans who had worked closely with the Viridians and had begun to notice inconsistencies in their behavior and abilities. Others were scientists and engineers who understood that the alien technology was impressive but not supernatural. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker had been training small teams of resistance fighters who would be responsible for activating Foster's neutralization devices during the ceremony. Each team would target specific Viridians and disable their quantum manipulators at the moment when their loss of power would be most visible to human observers. The timing had to be perfect because the Resistance would only get one chance to expose the deception before the aliens realized what was happening. Captain Jake Morrison had been working with underground networks on Earth to prepare for the massive broadcast that would accompany the technical demonstration. The Resistance had compiled all of their evidence into a comprehensive presentation that would show humans exactly how they had been deceived. The broadcast would include the historical records stolen from the Viridian ship and video analysis of alien technology in action. The Festival of Ascension arrived on schedule, and millions of humans gathered at temples across the galaxy to celebrate their divine rulers. The massive crystalline ships hung in orbit above each world like glowing beacons of hope and faith. Zephyr the Eternal had promised that this ceremony would be special because worthy humans would be chosen to join the ranks of the divine and receive the gift of eternal life. The ceremony began with the traditional prayers and offerings that humans had been taught to perform. Zephyr appeared at temples across the galaxy through his quantum communication network and began his grand address about the glory of serving the divine will. He spoke of the great honor that awaited those who proved themselves worthy of ascension and promised that the chosen ones would be transformed into beings of pure energy and light. As Zephyr reached the climax of his speech and prepared to demonstrate his power by healing the sick and raising the dead, the resistance struck with devastating effectiveness. Foster's neutralization devices activated simultaneously across dozens of worlds, and the quantum fields that powered Viridian technology began to collapse. The aliens who had seemed so powerful and divine suddenly found themselves unable to perform even the simplest miracles. At the same moment, Rodriguez's virus spread through the Viridian communication network and began destroying their quantum entanglement systems. The telepathic broadcasts that had allowed Zephyr to speak to all of humanity at once became garbled and distorted. The aliens found themselves cut off from each other and unable to coordinate their response to the unexpected attack on their technology. The resistance broadcast began as confused humans watched their gods struggle to maintain their divine facade. Morrison's voice carried across human space as he explained exactly how the Viridians had deceived them. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable as humans saw their alien rulers stripped of their power and revealed as the frauds they had always been. The reaction was immediate and chaotic as humans across the galaxy tried to process what they were seeing and hearing. Some refused to believe the evidence and attacked the resistance members in their communities. Others felt betrayed and angry that they had been manipulated by beings who claimed to love them. Many simply stood in shock as their entire worldview collapsed around them. The Viridians, who had been exposed by the neutralization devices, tried to retreat to their ships but found that their technology was failing throughout their fleet. The virus had spread further than Rodriguez had expected and was causing system failures that left the aliens vulnerable and confused. For the first time in thousands of years, the Viridians found themselves facing organized resistance from a species they had underestimated. Zephyr's final broadcast was filled with rage and threats as he abandoned his benevolent persona and revealed his true nature. The being who had claimed to be a loving creator, God showed himself to be a tyrant who would destroy anyone who dared to defy his authority. The mask had finally fallen and humanity could see their oppressors for what they really were. The galaxy exploded into chaos as humanity tore itself apart over the truth about their alien rulers. The revelation that the Viridians were frauds using advanced technology to deceive them had divided human civilization into two opposing camps that seemed ready to destroy each other. Millions of humans refused to accept the evidence and continued to worship the beings they believed had created all life, while others felt betrayed and angry at being manipulated by false gods who had enslaved their entire species. Admiral Henry Davis found himself commanding a human fleet that was fighting two different enemies at the same time. The Viridians had abandoned their peaceful facade and revealed themselves as the conquerors they had always been, while loyal human colonies attacked resistance strongholds with religious fury. Davis realized that the aliens had been preparing for this moment for thousands of years and had contingency plans that humanity could barely comprehend. The Viridians deployed weapons that could destroy entire planets in seconds and demonstrated why no species had ever successfully resisted their rule. Whole worlds that had supported the resistance were turned into lifeless rocks as Zephyr the Eternal showed humanity what happened to children who disobeyed their divine parents. The alien technology was so advanced that human defenses were almost useless against their devastating assault. Captain Jake Morrison led desperate hit-and-run attacks against Viridian supply lines using ships that had been equipped with Chief Engineer Amy Foster's reverse-engineered technology. The human vessels were still inferior to alien craft, but they could now fight back instead of being helplessly slaughtered. Morrison's raiders targeted the quantum communication networks that allowed the Viridians to coordinate their forces across multiple star systems. Dr. Maria Rodriguez worked frantically to develop new countermeasures as the aliens adapted to her original virus and began repairing their damaged systems. She discovered that the Viridians had backup networks and redundant systems that made them much harder to disable than she had originally thought. The aliens had learned from thousands of years of conquest and had prepared for every possible form of resistance. The war revealed something that the Viridians had not expected about human nature. Unlike the previous species they had conquered, humanity refused to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. Other civilizations had surrendered when faced with planet-killing weapons, but humans continued to fight with desperate courage that bordered on madness. They developed new tactics and strategies with each battle and adapted to alien technology faster than the Viridians thought possible. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker discovered that the Viridians had a critical weakness that could be exploited by human forces. The aliens had become so dependent on their technology that they were physically and mentally limited without it. Centuries of cybernetic enhancement had left them unable to function effectively when their quantum manipulators were disabled. Parker realized that the key to victory was not matching alien technology, but finding ways to strip it away from them. Dr. Lisa Carter's research team made a breakthrough when they learned how to create electromagnetic pulse weapons that were specifically designed to disrupt Viridian quantum field generators. The weapons were crude and required enormous amounts of power, but they could disable alien technology permanently instead of just temporarily. Carter's team began mass-producing the devices and distributing them to human resistance cells across the galaxy. The tide of war began to turn when human forces started using coordinated electromagnetic attacks that left entire Viridian ships powerless and vulnerable. The aliens found themselves facing an enemy that could learn from every encounter and develop new weapons faster than they could adapt their defenses. Humanity's greatest advantage was their ability to innovate under pressure and their refusal to give up no matter how desperate their situation became. Foster had been studying captured Viridian technology and discovered that their quantum manipulation devices were linked to a central control system on each ship. If the main quantum processor could be destroyed or disabled, the entire vessel would lose power and become helpless. Foster developed boarding charges that could penetrate alien hulls and target these critical systems directly. The Resistance began launching suicide missions against Viridian ships using boarding parties armed with Foster's quantum disruptors. Human volunteers knew they were unlikely to survive these attacks, but they were willing to sacrifice themselves to give their species a chance at freedom. The aliens had never faced an enemy that valued liberty more than life, and they struggled to understand human motivation. Rodriguez finally created a quantum virus that could spread through the entire Viridian fleet and cause cascading failures throughout their network. The virus was designed to target the specific quantum frequencies that the aliens used for their technology and would render their devices permanently inoperable. The weapon would take time to spread through alien systems, but once it reached critical mass, the entire Viridian fleet would be crippled. The space battles became increasingly desperate as both sides committed everything they had to the conflict. Human ships used ramming attacks and suicide runs to destroy alien vessels, while the Viridians responded with weapons that could crack planets in half. The war had become a test of will between two species that refused to surrender, and both sides knew that only one could survive. Morrison led a massive assault on the Viridian staging area in the Outer Rim, where the aliens had gathered their reserve forces. The human fleet was outnumbered 10-1, but they had the advantage of desperation and the knowledge that defeat meant the end of human civilization. The battle would decide whether humanity would remain free or spend eternity as slaves to false gods who had deceived them with advanced technology. The quantum virus had begun to spread through Viridian systems, and alien ships were starting to experience random failures that left them vulnerable to human attacks. Rodriguez monitored the virus from her command center and realized that they were approaching the critical moment when the infection would reach the alien motherships and disable their primary systems. The final battle was about to begin, and the fate of both species hung in the balance. The final battle began in the Kepler 442 system, where Zephyr the Eternal had gathered the last of his forces for a desperate assault on Earth. The alien fleet was massive and filled with weapons that could destroy entire star systems, but the Viridians were running out of time as Dr. Maria Rodriguez's quantum virus spread through their network like a plague that consumed their technology from within. The crystalline ships that had once seemed invincible now flickered with unstable energy as their quantum processors failed one by one. Admiral Henry Davis commanded the human fleet that rose to meet the alien armada in what everyone knew would be the last battle of the war. The human ships were outnumbered and outgunned, but they carried weapons that could disable Viridian technology and crews who were willing to die for their freedom. Davis had learned that the key to victory was not superior firepower, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for the cause of human liberation. The space battle was fierce and terrible as both fleets clashed in the darkness between the stars. Viridian energy weapons tore through human ships like paper, while electromagnetic pulse cannons disabled alien vessels and left them drifting helplessly in space. The fighting was close and brutal, with both sides taking massive casualties as they struggled for control of the system that would determine the fate of two civilizations. Captain Jake Morrison led his squadron in a desperate charge against the Viridian mothership where Zephyr had established his command center. The alien vessel was the size of a small moon and protected by energy shields that could deflect most human weapons, but Morrison knew that Chief Engineer Amy Foster's quantum disruptors could penetrate the defenses if they could get close enough. His ships flew through walls of enemy fire as they approached their target with suicidal determination. The quantum virus had finally reached the Viridian mothership and began attacking the central systems that controlled the entire alien fleet. Rodriguez watched from her command station as the infection spread through the ship's network and caused cascading failures that left the aliens unable to coordinate their defenses. The virus was working faster than she had expected, and the mothership's shields began to flicker and fail as its quantum processors shut down one by one. Lieutenant Commander Ben Parker led the boarding party that breached the mothership's hull and fought their way through corridors filled with automated defenses and desperate alien warriors. The Viridians had abandoned their divine facade completely and revealed themselves as the ancient conquerors they had always been. They fought with energy weapons and quantum manipulators, but their technology was failing as the virus consumed their systems from within. Parker's team battled through the ship's maze of corridors and found themselves facing Viridian warriors, who were stronger and faster than humans but had become dependent on their technology for survival. When their quantum enhancers failed, the aliens became clumsy and confused as they struggled to adapt to their natural limitations. The boarding party pressed their advantage and fought their way toward the ship's command center where Zephyr waited for them. The final confrontation took place in the heart of the alien mothership as Morrison and Parker breached the command center and found Zephyr surrounded by the ruins of his once mighty fleet. The being who had claimed to be a god and creator of all life stood before them as a pathetic ancient creature whose technology had finally failed him. His glowing skin was dim and his perfect features were twisted with rage and desperation. Zephyr tried to use his remaining power to destroy the human invaders, but his quantum manipulators were too damaged by the virus to function properly. The energy that had once allowed him to heal the sick and raise the dead now barely flickered in his hands as he faced the representatives of a species he had underestimated. The false god had been stripped of his divine power and revealed as the fraud he had always been. Morrison stood before the alien leader and felt no pity for the creature who had enslaved countless civilizations throughout the galaxy. Zephyr begged for mercy and offered to share all Viridian technology in exchange for his life, but Morrison understood that some crimes were too great for forgiveness. The being who had claimed to be humanity's creator had proven himself to be nothing more than a tyrant who used deception and fear to control others. The death of Zephyr the Eternal marked the end of Viridian rule and the beginning of human freedom. The alien fleet scattered as their command structure collapsed and their technology continued to fail. The surviving Viridians fled to the edge of the galaxy, where they could no longer threaten human civilization or any other species that might resist their deception. Rodriguez's virus had spread throughout the Viridian network and destroyed their ability to use the quantum manipulation technology that had made them seem godlike. The aliens were forced to abandon their conquered worlds and retreat to the Outer Rim, where they would spend the rest of their lives as refugees from their own crimes. The species that had once ruled the galaxy through deception and fear had been reduced to powerless wanderers. The war was over, but humanity had been forever changed by their victory over the false gods. They had learned that true power came not from advanced technology or claims of divine authority, but from the courage to stand up for what was right even when facing impossible odds. The human spirit had proven stronger than alien deception, and the galaxy was free from tyranny. Years later, Dr. Lisa Carter established institutes across human space that were dedicated to studying alien technology and preventing future deceptions. The lessons learned from the Viridian War would ensure that humanity would never again be fooled by beings who claimed to be gods. The galaxy had learned that divinity was not something that could be claimed through power or technology, but something that had to be earned through courage and sacrifice. The story of humanity's victory over the false gods spread throughout the galaxy and inspired other species to resist tyranny in all its forms. The humans had proven that even the most advanced technology could be defeated by determination and the refusal to accept slavery. The greatest power in the universe was not the ability to manipulate matter and energy, but the courage to remain free.